This book was inspired by my living in the world and seeing people and organizations do things that made no sense to me. And I would literally look at organizations that, decided to cut their benefits and cut their retirement plans, for instance, and people then couldn't afford to retire, and then they would have an old workforce. Or people do things in companies all the time that I would think to myself, how could they do that? What were they thinking, or were they thinking at all? So really what inspired me to write this book is just living in a world in which so much of what goes on makes no sense. Well, I think everybody ought to be reading this book. I mean, in addition to managers and leaders of organizations who need to figure out how to make decisions about managing people and about measurements and about strategy and to do a bunch of things better, I think this book is really of general interest because I think people who want to understand why so many organizations do so many crazy things will find this illuminating. My wife, who I understand is not the most objective person always, thinks it's a fun read as opposed to some of the other books I've written, which are, I think, have, of course, a lot of substance. This book also has a lot of substance and a lot of data, but it's written in relatively short chapters and short segments, so it's enjoyable. I think it's just fun to read, to understand what's going on in the world about organizations and people in management. I think the single most important point in the book is how companies filled with smart people manage to do so many things that are so unwise. And that oftentimes comes down to them not really thinking very systematically or maybe even at all about feedback effects, about the second and third or maybe even first order consequences of what they have done. So, for instance, there's a big trend in the US to have people make a lot of decisions about their health care and retirement. Well, that makes sense. Except when are people going to do that? Well, they're going to do it during the workday. And then, when are they going to do their work? So maybe this doesn't really save you money after all. When you cut wages as a way of cutting costs, well, what are people going to say when you say to them, by the way, I've cut your wages 30% for errors that you have not been involved in making, that I may have made, but you get to pay the price? Most people don't say thank you for saving the organization and thank you for helping me. Many of them will look for another job, and of course the best ones are able to leave. And some of them will withdraw their effort or try to sabotage the organization. So I think in lots of ways organizations have not thought very hard or systematically about feedback effects, and therefore they do a bunch of things that, if you reflect on it for even a few minutes, don't make any sense. I would really like readers, the other major takeaway I think that I would love readers to get from this book is to pay attention to the data and the evidence, and to not just act on the basis of belief in conventional wisdom. Conventional wisdom suggests that in order to be successful in world trade, you have to be a low-wage country. But up until 2005, Italy was an exporter of shoes. Germany is one of the big export countries. Japan has a surplus of trade with China, even though Japan's wages are much higher. So, that's just one example of where I think conventional wisdom about what produces success is wrong. A lot of companies have overinvested in technology to manage customer relationships and underinvested in the people. And in order to manage customer relationships, you need to first have a relationship. And those relationships are often created by human interaction with the sales associate or the person you talk to on the telephone. So I think, it's just, I think the message is, to think more deeply, to pay attention to the evidence and the data, and to not be as susceptible to a lot of the conventional wisdom about management issues and topics. Well, how does this book fit with the other books? That's a wonderful question. I think this book is, to some extent, an illustration of some of the points that we made in Hard Facts, Dangerous Half-Truths, and Total Nonsense, which was a book about evidence-based management. I mean, this book, to some extent, uses evidence to question a lot of conventional wisdom. And obviously, this book also fits, I think, with some of the themes of my earlier books on human resource management, because it talks about people and how they're managed as being really a key to organizational success. So I would say it fits, and hopefully it's, I keep learning all the time, so I hope that learning is reflected in what I write. I'm not sure it always is, but I hope so. Financial Times did a lovely review of the book, actually, I think yesterday or the day before. And the Financial Times begins by talking about, the review begins by talking about one of the examples on the incentive pay issues. I think, companies like to use incentives to fix all their problems. But incentives seldom work, mostly because organizations are not always very sophisticated in figuring out how people are going to act in response to the incentives. So the city of Albuquerque, to save money and to try to cut its overtime for garbage collectors, made a deal with the garbage collectors, which was they would pay them for 8 hours, even if they finished their routes faster. Well, you get garbage collectors who want to finish their routes faster. The quickest way to finish your route faster is not pick up all the garbage. Second way is the speed. And the third way is to drive the trucks overweight to the dump. And this came out in an Associated Press article wherein a civil grand jury in Albuquerque wanted to know why incentive pay had resulted in an increase in the cost of garbage collection from the accidents, from the fines, from driving overweight, and from having to send out the trucks to pick up the garbage that the other truck drivers had missed. So I think there are many illustrations and many anecdotes around the issue of incentive pay. But that is, I think, a wonderful example of how people say, well, we're going to fix everything with incentives, but they don't really think, if these people took these incentives seriously, what might they do? And do I really want them to do that? I would really like, sooner or later, I would like this book to have some of the same effects that I would wish my other books would have, which I'm not sure they have had, but it's another story. I really wish that people and companies would manage with more thought and more care because, while we can tell a bunch of funny stories and use lots of interesting data in the book, and we do, at the end of the day, when wages get cut and when customers don't get served and when organizations put in these automated phone systems, which drives everybody crazy, and when, and when benefits are changed and cut in all kinds of different ways, not only do the companies not get the benefits that they are expecting to get, but people are harmed in the process. And so it's, instead of win-win, it's kind of lose-lose. And it would be very nice if there were not so many situations in which both companies and their employees were basically losing because the organizations haven't thought very carefully or thoughtfully about what they're doing and why they're doing it. So that's what I hope the effect the book will have. I'm working on 2 new books, and they're both way behind schedule, but I need to do a new book on power. As you know, I teach a very popular elective here called The Paths to Power, and Managing with Power, which was written in 1992, is still a good book, and I still get nice comments on it, but I need to do a book that reflects what I've learned in the ensuing years and reflects the current version of the course more. So I think that's what comes next.